if people don't have materials to make art, I want to answer this question in two ways. And before I answer it with positive advice for people who don't have materials, I want to say that it's actually very important to have good materials. So this is something that's often overlooked. When you introduce somebody to image making, for example, let's say you're wanting them to start drawing or painting, and let's take painting as an example. So let's say the person is very young. Let's say they're 4 or 5. And you give them some color to work with, some paint, and you give them a paintbrush. If that paintbrush is a horrible, scratchy paintbrush, and if that paint is thin and the color isn't very saturated, and that child has to somehow now make a mark with that horrible paintbrush and that awful paint that hardly makes any color, they're going to be turned off. And so it is with all art materials. Good pencils, charcoal, good paper, and these things unfortunately are expensive. They cost a fortune. And so in order to introduce people to the world of particularly art making, and I'm thinking of the visual arts, you need good materials. So I want to make that as a caveat before I then talk about what do you do if you don't have good materials. Okay, so the question of what do you do if you don't have good materials? There are all kinds of things that you can use in terms of found materials. So the place to start is to look at your waste stream. What are the things that are coming in and out of your house? Cardboard for cereal packets, for example, envelopes that you can draw on the back of. So paper and card are very important starting points, because with paper and card, obviously you've got a drawing or a painting surface, but you've also got sculptural materials. And so you can build with cardboard. If you've got a pair of scissors, you can cut shapes out, and you can join them with things like masking tape. Masking tape costs, unfortunately. But you could also use a needle and thread. So you can sew paper together. If you make holes in the paper, that's another way of joining. Or a stapler if you've got access to a stapler. Staplers also cost, so that's also another thing that you're going to have to consider. But often a school will have that stationery, and that could be shared amongst learners. And if you've got paper, if you were to cut strips of paper and join them into loops, you can join those loops together to make chains, and you can make interior design with those chains. You can hang them from classroom lights to desks. So you can drape them over desks and make pretty things happen with the chains of paper. There are some basic materials that I like to have in my class that in some ways are the kind of, they cost money, but they're not super expensive. So there are some basic materials that I like to use that will cost money, but they're the cheapest that I think one can get away with. The first thing you need, of course, are drawing materials, and they're the simplest materials to find. So pencils and ballpoint pens. A black ballpoint pen and a soft pencil are two really nice things to have. A soft pencil is a pencil that will give you a dark line. A light pencil is a hard pencil, and that's typically like an HB. And I wouldn't, if you're going to have a choice of pencils, I wouldn't have HB pencils. I would have at least a 2B to a 4B pencil, so a soft, dark pencil. Because one of the problems we have is that when we draw, especially if the surface isn't white, if we're drawing on cardboard, for example, we want the mark that we make to register, to be visible. And if it's a light mark, then the drawings they're not so easy to see. And although often when we're teenagers, we quite like to make quite light drawings, we eventually learn that actually you've got to move through that and make drawings that are more powerful and have a wider range of lights and darks, but that go all the way to a very dark on the page. So what I often use is I buy a ream of printing paper, 70 grams per square meter printing paper. So when you go to the supermarket and you can buy 500 sheets of printing paper, I think it costs about 70 or 80 rand now. This is in 2021. You get 500 sheets of paper, A4 paper, and although it's quite thin, it's very nice for making drawings on. And you can always fold them in half and staple them in the middle and make little booklets out of them, so there are all kinds of things that you can do. And of course you can cut it up and make small sculptures and things out of it too. It's very, very cheap. If you want to have a slightly better paper to work on, to draw on and to paint on, then I have typically used this product, which is a sketchbook, and I typically buy A4. I very rarely work bigger than A4 as a teacher. That's just another thing to say in terms of resourcefulness. So I'm going off the point a little bit here, but one of the things that can happen is that we can often make works that are just too big. Even A3, I think, is too big. They take too long to make, they take too many materials to make, they're too expensive to make, they're difficult to store, they're harder to show because they're bigger. When you work on a smaller scale, and I've got the A4, but I've also got the half A4, which is called A5. And A5 is a lovely size to work because it means that as you're exploring things, you can make the work quite quickly. And then if it fails or if it's finished, you can then move on to the next one. And it gives you a chance to make lots of things rather than one big laborious work, which I've always been against. I think that there are times in one's life when one makes works like that, in one's school life and also in one's work as a professional, but that's not generally how I think we should be working creatively. Creativity for me is about small projects constantly. You make a thing a day, you make one little thing a day, and that can take an hour, not more than an hour. So just getting back to materials, painting materials, it's very good to learn how to work with color. And color is a tricky one because in order to really mix all colors, people say you need 3 primary colors to mix all other colors. It's not true. You actually need 6 primaries. You need 2 of each primary. And I'll just show you what I mean. This paint set, this is called gouache. And gouache is the cheapest, this particular brand as well, is the cheapest set of paints that you can buy. I think it costs about 150 Rand at the moment. It's the cheapest set of paints that you can buy that has all of the primaries that you need, all 6 primaries and other colors as well, in order how to learn how to mix color properly. The only color that don't have, that's not quite the right color is there's one of the reds that's not quite purple enough. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. I'll just open this for you. That's what the paint set looks like. And these are color samples from that set of paints that I've just shown you. There are the 2 reds. There are the 2 yellows. And there are the 2 blues. And you can see that if you want to make green, you're not going to use the purple blue, you're going to use the green blue. If you want to mix purple, you're going to use the purple blue, not the green blue. Get this the right way around. If you're going to make purple and you need a red, you're not going to use the orange red to make purple. You're going to use the purple red to make purple. If you're going to make orange, you're not going to use the purple red to make orange. You're going to use the orange red to make orange. I also just want to show you that the 2 reds that we have in the paint set that I showed you, the purple red and the orange red, and I said that one of the colors in the paint set that I showed you wasn't quite the right color. It's good enough, but if one had a choice, one wouldn't use this red to make purple. One would use a red that looks more like this. But you can definitely get away with this red. So as I say, this paint set of gouaches is definitely the one that I'd buy if I had the resources for it. If you're going to make orange, you want to use the orange yellow. If you want to make green, you want to use the green yellow. So people will think that you only need one, that there is one, they'll think that there's one yellow that you can make orange with and green. That yellow doesn't exist. There's no such thing in the world. You've got to have 6 primaries to mix all 3 secondaries properly. Okay. Brushes. If I buy brushes are expensive. The acrylic brushes are the cheapest and they're a very good thing to have. And I typically buy this size. I don't know if you can see that. I'm just looking on the brush. It's a size 12 brush. And that comes to a point, and it means that you can paint fine details, but you can also pick up a lot of paint in order to make broad marks. I like to have sculpture materials in my class, and that typically is cardboard boxes that things come in. You usually use a cutting knife, and I'll cut those into bits, often just random shapes, and then people can then stick those together either with a glue gun, which is an expensive thing to buy, but a very, very nice tool to have, because you can join anything to itself with a glue gun, and you can build sculptures out of found materials very easily. But you can use masking tape and things like that too to join cardboard. Other kinds of joining things would be staplers and glue. So Pritt cold glue, any paper-based or wood-based product that you join with cold glue, although you've got to keep it in place for a while, but after about 10 minutes it'll start to set. And thread-based materials, so to have some sewing needles and some thread and maybe some embroidery cotton if you can find some cheaply, some old scraps of fabric that you can embroider on or join together or make little things out of sculptures or bits of clothing, yarn to do crochet or knitting-based work, knot-based things like macrame and stuff. Coming back to your question of what would you have if you didn't have a lot of resources, these are things that require resources, but they're the lowest. For me, they're the least amount of resources. If a teacher is going to use only found materials and she's going to use no art materials, let's say she's teaching painting or visual arts, she's going to have to do an enormous amount of work to make those methods accessible to her learners. There's absolutely no ways that if you give those materials to her learners, that the learners are going to know what to do with them and that they're going to be excited by them easily. So this is another very important thing to remember, that it's a fallacy to think that you can get away with teaching the visual arts, for example, with absolutely no resources. You need money for them. And if you don't have money, you need lots and lots of time. And that translates into money because somebody's got to be paid to do that.